You're getting forgetful in your old age, Dad. Good thing we're here to help manage your finances. My daughter Jessica raised her champagne glass with a practiced smile, her boyfriend Dylan nodding beside her. I sat at my own birthday dinner table, my left arm in a sling, 3 cracked ribs wrapped tight beneath my shirt, pain shooting through my chest with every breath. The lake house, the one my late wife Margaret and I had bought 30 years ago, was packed with Jessica's friends, people I'd never met. They all laughed at her toast. None of them knew I'd almost drowned in that lake 48 hours earlier. None of them knew it wasn't an accident. I smiled back at my daughter. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. Someone definitely learned something this weekend. Then I reached for the laptop I'd placed on the table. In fact, why don't we all watch something together? I made a little video montage of our trip. Dylan's face went white. Let me back up. 6 months ago, I buried my wife of 35 years. Margaret died of pancreatic cancer. Fast, brutal, devastating. We'd had 3 good months after the diagnosis. Then she was gone. She left me our house in Seattle, this lake property in Oregon, and about $2 million in life insurance and retirement accounts. We'd lived modestly, saved aggressively. Margaret had been a nurse. I'd spent 30 years as a forensic accountant for the IRS. We'd planned to travel in retirement, maybe buy a sailboat. Instead, I was alone at 62, rattling around our empty house, drowning in silence. Jessica had never been particularly attentive. After college, she'd moved to Los Angeles, chasing dreams of social media fame. For years, she'd been an influencer, a term I still didn't fully understand. She posted photos of brunches, sunset views, designer handbags. She had hundreds of thousands of followers. What she didn't have was money. The influencer economy, I'd learned, was feast or famine, and Jessica had been starving for a while. She'd visited twice during Margaret's illness. Both times, she'd spent more time on her phone than with her dying mother. At the funeral, she'd taken selfies. I'd been too grief-stricken to process how wrong that was. My son David, a teacher in Portland, had pulled me aside and said, "Dad, something's off with Jess. Just be careful." I'd dismissed it. Grief makes people act strange, I'd told him. Then, about 2 months after the funeral, Jessica's behavior changed. Suddenly, she was calling 3 times a week, asking how I was doing, suggesting I see a therapist, recommending financial advisors. You shouldn't have to deal with all this alone, Dad. Managing money is stressful at your age. At my age, I was 62, not 90. I ran marathons. I'd just finished reorganizing our entire investment portfolio. But I was lonely. And when Jessica suggested we spend a long weekend at the lake house for my birthday in July, just the 3 of us, she said, I'd agreed. It would be nice to have company, to not spend another milestone alone. That should have been my first warning sign. Jessica had never wanted to spend time at the lake house. She'd complained about it her entire childhood. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, too remote. Now suddenly she wanted a whole weekend there. Dylan and I are so excited, she'd gushed over the phone. We'll cook your favorite meals, go fishing, really reconnect as a family. Dylan, her boyfriend of 8 months. I'd met him once, briefly, at Margaret's funeral. Mid-30s, handsome in an Instagram way. Perfect teeth, expensive watch. He'd given me a too firm handshake and called me sir too many times. Something about him had set my teeth on edge, but I'd chalked it up to my own grief and loneliness. Nobody would seem good enough for my daughter right now. They arrived at the lake house on Friday afternoon, pulling up in a rented Range Rover that probably cost more per day than Jessica claimed to make in a month. I was already there, having driven down Thursday night to open up the house, check the dock, make sure everything was ready. "Dad!" Jessica hugged me tight, and I winced. I'd pulled a muscle working in the garden the week before. She didn't notice. "You look tired. Are you sleeping okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. It's good to see you." Dylan bounded up the steps with their luggage. Designer suitcases, 3 of them for a weekend trip. "Great place you've got here, sir. Really remote, huh? I bet you don't get any cell service out here." "Not much," I admitted. "There's a landline in the house, though. And satellite internet, slow but functional." He nodded, exchanging a glance with Jessica, that I couldn't quite read. In my 30 years investigating financial crimes, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people, and my instincts were screaming that something was off. That first evening was pleasant enough. We grilled steaks, drank wine, watched the sunset from the dock. Jessica asked a lot of questions about my paperwork situation. Had I updated my will? Who had power of attorney? Had I thought about setting up a trust? Did I have someone helping me manage the accounts? I managed other people's money for 3 decades, I reminded her gently. I think I can handle my own. Of course, Dad. I just worry about you being overwhelmed. Grief can affect cognitive function, you know. I read an article about it. Dylan chimed in. My uncle went through something similar after my aunt died. Started making really questionable financial decisions. Family had to step in. I smiled and changed the subject, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. This was starting to feel like something I'd investigated before. Family members circling a vulnerable elderly person, planting seeds of doubt about their competence, setting the stage for a takeover of assets. But this was my daughter. Surely I was being paranoid. Grief did strange things to people. Maybe it was affecting my judgment. Saturday morning, Jessica suggested we take the boat out. Remember how Mom loved being out on the water? We could scatter some of her ashes, have a little private ceremony. I'd brought Margaret's ashes. I'd been planning to scatter them here anyway. We'd spent so many happy summers at this lake, it seemed fitting. That's a beautiful idea, sweetheart. Dylan offered to captain the boat. I grew up around boats, sir. Used to work on a charter fishing operation in Florida. Something about that felt wrong, too. If he'd grown up around boats, why had he stumbled on the dock last night? Why had he called the stern the back end? But again, I pushed the doubt aside. Maybe he was just rusty. We headed out around 10. The lake was calm, mirror, smooth, beautiful. Jessica and I sat in the back with the urn while Dylan piloted us toward the center of the lake. The dock disappeared behind us. The nearest neighbor's place was barely visible through the trees. We were completely alone. Jessica was talking about her mother, sharing memories, and I was crying, really crying for the first time since the funeral. Maybe that's why I didn't notice Dylan cut the engine, didn't notice him moving behind me, didn't notice Jessica's reminiscence suddenly stop. Then Dylan's hands were on my shoulders, and I was going over the side. The water was shockingly cold. I went under, the weight of my clothes pulling me down. I kicked hard, broke the surface, gasped for air. The boat was already 10 feet away and moving. "Help!" I shouted. The engine. But Dylan wasn't trying to turn around. He was accelerating. Jessica was standing beside him, her face pale but set. Neither of them was looking back. That's when I understood. This wasn't an accident. They'd just tried to kill me. Adrenaline flooded my system. I was a strong swimmer. Margaret and I used to swim across this lake and back every summer. But I was also 62, fully clothed, with a pulled muscle in my shoulder, and the shore was a quarter-mile away. The water was maybe 60 degrees. I had minutes, not hours. I started swimming, focusing on technique over speed, trying to conserve energy. Behind me, I could hear the boat engine fading. They were leaving. They were actually leaving me to drown. My mind raced even as my arms pulled through the water. Why? The money, obviously. Jessica and Dylan needed cash. But how did they plan to access it? I'd have to be declared dead, which would take years unless there was a body. Unless there were witnesses. Unless my own daughter told the police her elderly, grief-stricken father had gotten confused, stood up suddenly, and fallen overboard before she could stop him. She'd been so worried about his mental state lately. He'd been acting strange. Maybe he'd wanted to join his wife. That scenario played out in my head with crystal clarity. It would work. It would absolutely work. Unless I survived. I swam harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs, the cramping in my legs. The shoreline was getting closer. 200 yards. 150. My shoulders screamed in pain. I didn't care. 100 yards. That's when I hit the submerged log. My ribs connected with something hard and unyielding. Pain exploded through my chest. I went under, gulping water, panicking. No, I would not die here. I would not give them the satisfaction. I surfaced, coughing, choking, but still swimming. 75 yards. 50. I could touch bottom now. I half swam, half crawled the last 20 yards, collapsing on the rocky shore, ribs on fire, lungs heaving. I'd made it. I was alive. I lay there for several minutes, just breathing, checking my injuries. The ribs were bad. At least 2 or 3 cracked, maybe broken. My shoulder was worse, but I was alive and thinking clearly. That was what mattered. I was on the wrong side of the lake, at least 2 miles from the house by foot through dense forest. No phone, no way to call for help. The sun said it was around 11. They'd have to come back eventually, if only to discover that I'd never made it back. Would they call the police, search for my body, or would they panic and run? I needed to get back to the house. I needed evidence, and I needed to do it without them knowing I'd survived. I started walking, using the shoreline as a guide. Every step hurt. Every breath was agony. But I'd spent 2 years in Army intelligence before college. I'd investigated hundreds of fraud cases. I knew how to think through pain, how to plan, how to gather proof. By the time I made it back to the house, it took nearly 3 hours. I had a strategy. The Range Rover was gone. The house was empty. Jessica's phone was charging on the kitchen counter. She must have forgotten it in the rush to leave. Dylan's laptop was open on the dining table. This was a gift. I photographed everything. Jessica's phone showed dozens of searches over the past 2 months. How long to declare someone dead, power of attorney without consent, early signs of dementia, inheriting from a parent, forging signatures, text messages to Dylan. He's so trusting, it's almost sad. We just need him to sign one thing. The lake house is perfect, totally isolated. Dylan's laptop was even better. Email chains with a lawyer in Los Angeles about declaring someone mentally incompetent. Research on my financial accounts. They knew exactly how much I was worth. A document folder labeled Operation Windfall with forged power of attorney papers, my signature perfectly copied. They'd been practicing. More damning. A note in Dylan's handwriting. Boating accident. Jessica drives back alone, hysterical. Dad fell overboard. She couldn't save him. She's been worried about his mental state. Witnesses. None. Body. May not be recovered for days, weeks. Will. Jessica is executor, inherits everything. Timeline. Report Sunday evening. Gives us time to clean up. They'd planned this, meticulously. And they'd been planning it since before they even suggested this trip. I photographed everything, uploaded it to a cloud storage account they didn't know about. Then I checked the house carefully. The bathroom showed signs they'd both showered and packed quickly. Jessica's makeup bag was gone. The guest room was empty of their belongings. They'd fled. They thought I was dead, and they'd panicked. But they'd be back. They'd have to be. Running would look suspicious. They'd convince themselves that sticking to the plan was safer. They'd return, probably late tonight or early tomorrow, discover I was missing, call the police, play the devastated daughter. I had maybe 12 hours. I called David from the landline. Don't say anything, just listen. Jessica and Dylan just tried to kill me. I'm okay. I need you to do exactly what I tell you. To his credit, my son didn't question me. 15 years of watching me work fraud cases had taught him I didn't exaggerate. Within an hour, he'd arranged everything. A friend who was a detective with Oregon State Police, a doctor to document my injuries, a lawyer to draft emergency injunctions freezing my accounts. By Sunday morning, I had a dossier that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Photographs, documents, medical records showing injuries consistent with being pushed from a boat, witness statements from David about Jessica's sudden interest in my finances, analysis of the forged documents on Dylan's laptop. I had them, completely, undeniably. But I wanted more than justice. I wanted them to know they'd underestimated me. I wanted them to understand that grief hadn't made me weak, and age hadn't made me stupid. So when Jessica called the house Sunday afternoon, sobbing, saying they'd been in town and just heard a weather report about dangerous conditions on the lake, and they were so worried, was I okay? I played along. I'm fine, sweetheart. I decided not to go out on the boat yesterday after all. Too choppy. I've just been reading. The relief in her voice was palpable. Oh, thank God. We felt so bad leaving early. But Dylan had a work emergency. We're actually driving back up right now. We still want to celebrate your birthday properly. That's wonderful. Why don't we plan a nice dinner here tomorrow night? My birthday's not until Monday anyway. Perfect. We'll bring everything. You don't have to do anything, Dad. Just relax. Monday evening, they arrived with bags of groceries and champagne. Jessica hugged me carefully. I'd said I'd pulled a muscle in the garden and set about preparing an elaborate meal. Dylan made small talk about his work emergency, spinning an elaborate lie I didn't bother to question. I'd invited David and his wife, Amy, just to keep it family. Jessica had looked annoyed but agreed. I'd also invited Detective Sarah Chen, though I'd introduced her as an old colleague from my IRS days. Dylan had looked nervous, but Jessica welcomed her warmly. Dinner was beautiful. Jessica had gone all out. Filet mignon, roasted vegetables, my favorite wine. As we finished dessert, she stood up with her champagne glass. I want to make a toast to my amazing father. Dad, I know this year has been incredibly hard for you. Losing Mom, adjusting to being alone, dealing with all the paperwork and financial stuff. Dylan and I have been talking, and we want you to know we're here for you. In fact, she pulled out a folder we've been working with a financial advisor, and we think it would really help if you let us take over managing some of the day-to-day financial decisions. You're getting forgetful in your old age, Dad. Good thing we're here to help manage your finances. The table went quiet. David was staring at his sister in disbelief. Amy looked horrified. Detective Chen's expression was carefully neutral. I smiled. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. Someone definitely learned something this weekend. In fact, why don't we all watch something together? I made a little video montage of our trip. I opened the laptop I'd placed on the table. Dylan's face went white. Actually, sir, maybe we should. No, I insist. I clicked play. The screen filled with photographs. Jessica's phone searches, Dylan's emails, the forged documents, the Operation Windfall folder, text messages, my medical records showing 3 cracked ribs, a partially dislocated shoulder, and water in my lungs. And finally, footage from a camera I'd hidden in the boat. I'd installed it years ago after some kids had vandalized the dock, showing Dylan's hands on my shoulders, showing me going over the side, showing Jessica standing beside him as they accelerated away. The silence was absolute. You see, I said conversationally, I spent 30 years investigating financial fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, embezzlement. I've seen every scam there is. And you too? I looked at my daughter, my heart breaking. You ran the most common one there is. Isolate the vulnerable target, question their competence, gain control of their assets. The only twist was trying to actually kill me instead of just controlling me. Dad, I can explain, Jessica's voice was shaking. Can you explain why you've been searching how to forge a signature for the past month? Can you explain why Dylan has a criminal record in Florida for securities fraud that you thought I wouldn't find? Can you explain why you tried to drown me on Saturday? Dylan bolted for the door. David, a former college linebacker, blocked his way. Detective Chen stood up, pulling out her badge. Dylan Morrison, Jessica Mitchell, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Jessica was crying now, real tears, mascara running down her face. Daddy, please. We were desperate. Dylan has debts. Bad people were threatening him. I thought if you were gone, it would be quick, and you wouldn't suffer anymore anyway. You were so sad after Mom died. You thought maybe it would be a mercy killing? I finished. That's what you're going with? We weren't going to let you suffer. The water was cold. You would have just gone to sleep. I'm 62 years old, I said quietly. I'm not elderly. I'm not incompetent. I'm not ready to die. Your mother and I built a life together. And yes, I'm grieving her. But grief isn't weakness. Age isn't incompetence. And your assumption that I'd be an easy mark because I'm old and sad? That was your biggest mistake. Dylan was screaming now, as David held him and Detective Chen cuffed him. "She made me do it. She said her dad was rich and half senile and it would be easy. She planned the whole thing." Jessica's face crumpled. "That's not true. Dylan, you—" "Enough." Detective Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "You can both explain yourselves at the station. Anything you say now will be used against you." As they were led out in handcuffs, Jessica looked back at me. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't." I turned away. I couldn't look at her. My daughter. The little girl I'd taught to swim in this very lake. The teenager I'd helped through heartbreaks and exam stress. The woman who'd just tried to kill me for money. After they left, I sat on the deck with David and Amy. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the water gold and pink. Margaret's favorite time of day. "I'm sorry, Dad," David said quietly. "I knew something was off, but I never thought—" "Neither did I admitted. I wanted to believe she'd changed. That grief had made her realize family mattered. What happens now? Now, they'll be charged. The evidence is overwhelming. Dylan has a prior record, which won't help him. Jessica, my voice caught Jessica, will probably take a plea deal. Her lawyer will argue she was manipulated, coerced. Maybe that's even partly true. She'll serve time, but not as much as Dylan. And you?" I looked out at the lake. I'd almost died in that water, but I'd also been swimming in it since I was younger than David. It held memories of Margaret, of summer barbecues, of teaching my kids to fish. I wouldn't let Jessica and Dylan's betrayal poison that. "I'll heal," I said. "Physically, the ribs will take 6 weeks. Emotionally, longer. I'll need to grieve losing my daughter on top of losing my wife. I'll need to rebuild trust in people. But I'm not done yet. Your mother and I had plans. Travel, adventure, living fully. I'm going to honor those plans." "Need company?" Amy asked gently. "We've been talking about taking a sabbatical. Maybe we could travel together for a while." I smiled. "I'd like that." 3 months later, I sat in a courtroom and watched my daughter plead guilty to attempted murder, fraud, and elder abuse. She got 12 years. Dylan got 25. She cried. She apologized again. She begged for forgiveness. I didn't give it to her. Not yet. Maybe someday. But not yet. I sold the lake house. Too many ghosts now, both good and bad. I used the money to fund a scholarship in Margaret's name for nursing students and to set up a foundation raising awareness about elder financial abuse. David and Amy and I spent 6 months traveling through Europe, seeing all the places Margaret and I had dreamed about. I scattered her ashes in a dozen beautiful places. I started therapy. I started dating, cautiously. I started living again. And I learned something those 30 years investigating fraud had never quite taught me. The people who underestimate you are always the ones who know you least. Jessica had seen an old, sad widower. She'd missed the investigator, the veteran, the marathon runner, the man who'd survived worse than her clumsy murder attempt. She'd looked at my age and my grief and seen weakness. She should have seen strength tempered by experience, wisdom earned through loss, and the absolute refusal to go gentle into that good night. On my 63rd birthday, I ran my first ultramarathon, 50 miles through the mountains. Every step hurt. Every mile felt impossible. But I finished, because that's what I do. I survive. I adapt. I win. And I never, ever let anyone make me feel like I'm too old to fight back.